Hi, welcome to the first in a series on the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. We had, in January, we had a webinar where I talked a lot about the mystical experiences and some of the information about the discovery of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene and some of the history and background of it. And today I'm going to actually begin to cover the Gospel of Mary Magdalene in more details. So as we begin, if there's questions that come up for you, because this is a pre-recorded video, please make a note, write them down, and you can email them to me at Magdalene, Magdalene, gospel@gmail.com, and I will be happy to answer your questions. So in this second webinar, I love this image that Daniel Holman did, which helps to explain the whole purpose of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. Above here, he says, know thyself. And this is really what she did. She, more than anyone ever, was able to know herself and know the truth about herself, which is that she was one with God. I'm sorry, I'm cold here where I am. So it's very exciting because she had an amazing demonstration of a human being who actually hung on every word of Jesus. He was trying to teach the disciples how to be able to. So I'm still figuring this out. Anyway, this is presenter mode so that I can see the next slide coming up. And if someone out there knows how to teach me how to be able to switch, I would love to know, so that I can have presenter mode but have it not show up on the webinar, but I haven't been able to figure that out. So, oh well. Meantime, I want to move on. So what happens is we're going to be talking about the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, and the fragments, as we learned from the first webinar, there are missing pages. And much of my experience with being introduced to the Gospel of Mary Magdalene all came out of amazing synchronicities and mystical experiences that were quite extraordinary. And finding the first missing pages was also one of those. I had this book in my house because at the time that I became aware that there was way more going on with Mary Magdalene, I started actually buying up so many of the books that were written about her. So I had bought this book, not really understanding what it was that I had. And when I decided to form a group and really take the time, we took a whole year to really dive in deep, because there's only 18 pages in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. But to really understand what is being shared, it's not something you can gloss over and easily read, because otherwise you miss so much of what. It's a portal that allows you to open yourself and experience a greater awakening. So suddenly I look at the, let's see if this zooms in here. No, not really. I was able to look, and I saw that this basically was saying that it contains the missing pages. And these two women who are involved, one of whom channeled the missing pages, were collaborating and working together as mediums, and they were able to access it. So I'm going to go into what was actually in the missing pages, but before I go back and talk about that, I wanted to fill in some additional details about the actual experiences that I had that opened my mind and opened my heart to the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. So a friend of mine said, "Ah, forget about her. You know, she died over 2,000 years ago. She's a dead woman. And why are you studying a dead woman?" And first off, she's missing from my past history. My past history should have been full of her. And growing up as a little girl in a Protestant church, which is completely devoid of the divine feminine, at least the Catholics have Mother Mary, even though they're portraying her in an inaccurate light, and not really showing the true, authentic master that she was. There is a respect and an honoring and a love for her that is shared. So this particular devoid in my life, I needed to fill that hole. And this revelation that there was more about her, well, it just blew my mind. And I became obsessed, not really understanding why I needed to know, but I was in the question of what is going on here. And so I got led to these two women. And I learned about the living mystery of Mary Magdalene. Kathleen McGowan is the author of The Expected One. She's written many books. She's an extraordinary researcher, was originally trained as an investigative journalist. And she launched the National Magdalene movement, which I went to meet her and 70 other women who flew in from all over the world. It was a glorious and wonderful time. And then the other woman who changed my life was Elizabeth Kelly. She is of the Holy Order of Mary Magdalene. This is an order out of France, and it is an order that claims a paper trail lineage going all the way back to at least the 12th century. Possibly they say they can document women who have been ordained by Mary Magdalene, who ordained women through a secret order down through the ages. And this order ordains one woman a year in the world, and Elizabeth Kelly was chosen to be ordained. And she went into a 3-day Kundalini experience. It was very powerful. And she was in a book study group where I was writing a book, and I got to meet her. And after meeting her, I said, "Oh," and then she went to see the funeral, and she met these monks who were overseeing a monastery devoted to Magdalene, and they told her about her home and the Franciscan monks in the south of France, and so she went to there. And then they told her about Magdalene's home in Israel, in Galilee, on the Sea of Galilee, and Elizabeth went there and met the monks, found the monks, and they're now excavating this land and are finding all the documentation that supports the Luke chapter 8 that said that Mary Magdalene was a financier of Jesus' ministry, so that she was actually a wealthy, very successful businesswoman, not the prostitute. And of course, the Catholic Church did come out and officially make a proclamation that she was not a prostitute. So, anyway, Elizabeth and Kathleen McGowan came to the bookstore in our town for a book signing, and I asked her, was there a Magdalene gathering? And she said, "Oh yes, it's going to be in 2 weeks." And so I flew to Connecticut. So Kathleen has been a big part of my life in helping open me up. So I honor these two women for what they're doing. So the other thing was that I was a Course in Miracles student. And so what is Mary's connection with the Course in Miracles? Well, as I was going through this period of studying the Gospel of Mary and the Gospel of Thomas, I was also a Course in Miracles student. And so what I found was I would be with my gospel group reading something about Mary and Thomas, and then I would go to my Course in Miracles group and find out that we had just read that passage literally word for word. So I began to document the places where the Course in Miracles was showing up in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. And I was blown away how often that happens. So some people may not know what is A Course in Miracles, but basically it's a channeled writing by Jesus. And this particular book has 3 parts to it, but it was scribed by Dr. Helen Schuckner, who is at Columbia University of all things. And it's the process of the interdictation that Jesus was telling her that the Bible interpretations were incorrect. And so he was trying to bring forth the ideas through her that would correct the miscorrections. And so that makes the Course in Miracles a really important tool for understanding the Gospel of Mary Magdalene because of the corrections. Because the Gospel of Mary Magdalene actually shows us the original intent. So there's a section it's made up of 3 parts, and there's a part that's called the Manual for Teachers. And it says, there are those who have reached God directly, retaining no trace of worldly limits and remembering their own identity perfectly. These might be called the teacher of teachers, because although they are no longer visible, their image can yet be called upon, and they will appear when and where it is helpful to do so. So you remember I was saying that Kathleen McGowan had an apparition of Mary Magdalene appear to her, and Elizabeth Kelly had one. And Kathleen said that when she was traveling and doing her book signings, that she had a lot of women come up to her and say that they had also had apparitions appear to them, or their daughters had, or they had rememberings of being in past lives with Mary Magdalene. So there was a lot of this interconnection. But this is really important to understand, because those who have reached God directly, retaining no trace of worldly limits and remembering their own identity, are able to come back and interface with us. So that these women are now receiving. So the Gospel of Mary Magdalene talks about Magdalene's experience of realizing her direct connection with God in a way that was very much aligned with what the Course talks about. So that was really fascinating. But let's go back for a minute. So you remember from the first webinar, I was telling you the story about going to Montségur in the south of France. And this is the monastery for the Cathars. The Cathars were labeled heretics by the Pope. And the Cathars believed that women were equal in spirit to men, and both were involved in equality. So women could be married to the priests, and the women were honored and they were respected. And of course, the Pope would have none of this at the time. So there was a destroying of the Cathars of the monastery. So when they destroyed the Cathars, 4 escaped off the backside. Now there's different stories about the 4 who escaped, but basically one of them was a little girl who was fully trained in the ways of the Cathar priestess. And the reason they trained the little girl was because she would be not bothered by the Catholic Church, because the Catholic Church point of view was that little girls were rubbish. They were throwaways. They didn't matter. They didn't count. You didn't need to bother with them. And so that's the way they were able to preserve the teachings. And so one of the things that was interesting was, because I was so obsessed with learning everything I could learn, Kathleen has on her website resource links. And I was clicking through different resource links, who were clicking through to different pages, and I stumbled across a page that was called the Magdalene House, and there was the names of all of these people, and these were considered to be the names of the descendants of the 4 who escaped off the backside of the mountain. there was my family name, and I have a brother. We have different fathers, same mother, and there was my brother's um, father's family name. And so I was very, very surprised to find this kind of personal connection to the Cathar lineage. And of course, what ended up happening was there is a prophecy that says that when the laurel tree shall bloom in 700 years, the Cathars will rise again. And because there's so many of them, it was basically a genocide of the Cathar community. And now in Barcelona, Spain, there is a group of this man in the photo on the left is considered the prophet of the Cathars. He received a transmission from one of the women who was channeling Mother Mary, and he became awakened. And then the man who is on the right is Father Herman, who is actually here right now. Will also be at our Easter event, because they are traveling the world now, spreading the message of the Cathars, which is a very simple message. It is that God is love, and they practice kindness, and they trust God and travel with God's faith and trust that everything, all their needs will be provided for. And it's quite remarkable the extent to which they are able to do that. So they're bringing the message and the practice of kindness. So they will be at our Magdalene Easter Moonrise service, which we do every year. This year it will be at the Marin Universalist Church, and we will be filming it. So if you're not in the area, you can certainly go to my website at Gospel of Mary Magdalene.info, and it will be at the end of this webinar as well. And you'll be able to get the information to hook up with us, or send me an email at magdalenegospel@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to send you the link so that you can sign up to receive the film of the event. So the other remarkable thing that happened, because there's something that they say throughout the Gospel of Mary Magdalene: do you have the eyes to see and the ears to hear? And so it talks about a seeing that is much greater and a hearing that is much greater. It's not the physical body seeing or the ears hearing. It's an inner knowing and a vision. So I was at Unity in Marin and was interested in bringing forth some of the information that I was learning. And what I discovered was that the senior minister, Bill Englehart, had a dream. And he told me a couple of days after he had the dream about the dream that the Black Madonna came to him. And so when he was talking to her, she said, "Bill, I want the rudder." Now, the rudder is the part that steers the ship. And he was not only president or head of the senior minister of Unity in Marin, he was also president of the board of Worldwide Unity. So he literally was captain of the whole ship worldwide. And she said, "Bill, I want the rudder." And he's like, "No, you can't have the rudder. The rudder's mine." And she's like, "Bill, you need to give me the rudder." And he was like, "What?" But she wouldn't argue with him. She just held out her hands and she looked at him and she said, "Bill, the rudder." And he released the rudder to her because it was so intense and so strong. And he woke up and he thought, "Oh my God, I got to talk to Christy," because I know she knows about the Black Madonna. He didn't know much about her. But when he asked me, "What do you think it means, the dream?" I said, "Well, she wants in." And Unity is the crack that in the, Protestant church, because of the fact that Unity practices oneness, they're the closest in alignment to the truth to be able to break open and let the return of the divine feminine come in with the teachings and knowledge. So all of a sudden, I was allowed to do all these celebrations and talks and ceremonies. They just like the doors flew wide open, and I was allowed to participate without going through their normal protocol, which is that you had to be a licensed unity minister and all that kind of stuff. Although I was ordained and I had intense study that I had done, and not including my master's degree. And my master's degree, ironically, was on the impact of the Eastern religions on Western psychotherapy. So I had done a lot of study around the various teachings. So, but the really amazing thing about the dream is that she wants the rudder. Because, and I hadn't really connected the dots until much later when I remembered in our Easter ceremony, we tell the story about the rudderless boat that Joseph of Arimathea came supposedly with this Egyptian slave child. Mary Solomon, Mary Jacobs, and Mary Magdalene set sail from Alexandria, Egypt after the crucifixion because it wasn't safe for them to be there anymore. And some claim, the gypsies, that, and they celebrate by carrying Sarah, the child, and they have a parade down to the waters where the boat came in. And they bring the Saint Sarah to the sea. Now, Saint Sarah, this Egyptian slave child, some say was the daughter of Mary Magdalene, and that she had gotten pregnant in the Garden of Gethsemane. And the legend is that Sarah was able to walk on water. So she pulled the boat to shore when they arrived at Montségur. I mean, at the La Sainte Mère del Mer, La Sainte Marias del Mer in France. I'm sorry, I'm not good with French. And so, but the gypsies also honor her as her own goddess, and they consider her to be a Black Madonna icon. So there is this intermingling of the stories of the two cultures, some bringing in the aspect of Kali, some bringing in the aspect of the pagan Black Madonna, and the Magdalene daughter, all coalescing onto this one icon. Well, in the meantime, I had seen this stunning painting of the Black Madonna by a woman named Elizabeth Gibbons. And Elizabeth had come to Grace Cathedral, which is a big, beautiful theater for a cathedral in San Francisco. And she had brought one of her Magdalene paintings to a workshop I was attending there on the Magdalene by Kayleen Osbo, who will be speaking this year at our Easter service. So I was like, whoa, she brings her paintings. I was going to see if she could bring this painting to my event that I was having, celebration I was having, where we were going to honor the Black Madonna because of what she had done with Bill's Dream and opened the doors for me to be able to. So I always open with an acknowledgement to the Black Madonna. And so when I talked to Elizabeth, I said to her, and this is, Elizabeth is in the middle here. And I said to her, you know, I just wanted you to know that we're doing this event, and if there's any way you could bring your painting, we would love it. And she goes, oh my God, I don't think so. She said, that painting is really big and it's very heavy. It takes 2 people to carry it. And she said, this is like, when is this? A Friday night? Traffic out of San Francisco to get up to Novato, which is like heavy traffic, to get there by 7 o'clock. She says, I don't think so. But she said, let me think about it. Well, what she didn't realize was she was planning to go to the Fort Mason the next day. And at Fort Mason, they have a crystal fair. And she always goes to the crystal fair to get some of her art supplies. And when she walked into the thing, she was looking at, she's looking at the thing, and she realizes that, oh my God, she's got people on the side of her who want to have readings, and she doesn't ever go for readings. She doesn't do readings. But this one woman was like, wow, she was really like pulling on her, like, oh my God, I should have a reading from her. And that was Michelle Newman, who is here on the left. And so she decided to honor it. She sat down, and Michelle says, well, what would you like a reading about? She goes, I don't know. I wasn't planning to have a reading, but how about, how do I get my artwork out into the world? And so Michelle closes her eyes and she says, okay. Oh my God, she goes, I'm getting a very clear, direct message immediately. You're supposed to take your Black Madonna painting to help this woman named Christy Michaels at Unity Marin on Friday night. And of course, Elizabeth fell off her chair when she heard this story. And so when I talked to her the next day, she says, I was like so ready to apologize. I didn't know this woman that much, and I felt like I had imposed on her, and I didn't want her to feel bad when she was going to call me and tell me, no, she can't do it. And she goes, no, I am doing it, but let me tell you why. And so she brought her wonderful painting. And so thinking about this, that Mary Magdalene and the other women and Joseph came by rudderless boat. So the Black Madonna is coming and to Bill Englehart, and she's saying, I want the rudder. It's like the divine feminine is now going to steer the ship. And of course, this was the year when we started to see all the changes. We had the solstice of 2012, which was supposed to be the end of the world. But actually, it turned out it was the end of an age and the beginning of a new age. And the new age was the age of the equality between male and female. And so we started to see immediately with the 1 Billion Rising movement, women declaring no more sex abuse, and lots of things happening to raise the awareness of women to be able to stop abuse and empower themselves. And so, we began to also learn about what the Course in Miracles says, that these women these people who have had direct connections with God, were ones that were the teacher of teachers. And of course, when you travel through France, you see all this evidence throughout the south of France that Mary Magdalene was there and that she was teaching, and there are all these chapels devoted to her or to the Divine Mother. And there's legends and stories about her work in the area, teaching people. So why is this book so important? She is the living demonstration of one who truly understood Jesus' teachings in the pure sense, in the original intent. She had her own teaching from her own experience. So when she shared what it is that she learned, you got the experience of someone who understood what Jesus was trying to teach. And it shows this incredible original intent, which was, so the purpose of this inspiration was the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. As it is mirrored in A Course in Miracles. This is really phenomenal, because when we come into these sections where pieces are missing, because it was found in fragments, right? And pieces are missing. I felt good to slow down for a second. Then the Course in Miracles fills in the pieces. And that's what I found was so wonderful. So you'll begin to see the original intent of this. There are certain concepts that we are equal as spirit, male and female. There is no sin. The concept of sin is something that man has made up. And the feminine face of God is rising up. So Jesus was elevating the status of women and tried very hard to do that. And being awake and seeing our oneness is one of our functions to understand and know who we are. We're becoming fully human, male and female, integrated. So we each have a male aspect and a female aspect. So in order to move into wholeness and oneness, which is why, you have the patriarchy up here and you have the divine feminine down here, barely a blip on the radar screen. And people don't understand until you raise the divine feminine up and then you join the two together. Now you're going to get the wholeness that you can then integrate within yourself and become one within yourself. So we live in the world of duality. Duality is an illusion. And people say, well, oneness is the greater and higher truth. Great. If you can go there like that, so be it. I can't. So we have the divine masculine up here. We have the divine feminine down here. We're raising up the divine feminine. And now we're moving towards the integrated whole self in becoming a wholehearted, wholly integrated being, a whole human being. And now we can begin to practice extending ourselves, extending our love, sharing our love, moving ourselves towards this beautiful expression of a greater truth. But it takes doing it from an integrated self. So this is where we learn to have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. And this seeing with the vision is seen with vision, not with the body size, which I'll explain more of. So the concept in the Course in Miracles is the same. The Course in Miracles is saying we are equal in spirit. And some people will say, well, wait a minute, the Course in Miracles is full of all this male language. So many hymns and he's, and very little use of female gender language. And I've shared this story, so I don't know if you've heard this or not, but I was really struck by that too. Many Course teachers would just say, just get over it. They don't mean that. They mean we're one in spirit. Everyone's one in spirit. Anybody who has any life in them, it's the life, we are the one life. But it still wasn't sitting well. And then I asked about it in a prayer meditation as I was getting ready to talk to a group. And I was told in my meditation that it is actually H period, I period, M period. H period, I period, M period. What is that? H is for heaven, I is for in, M is for me. So him is referring to heaven in me. And each one of us is responsible to having our direct experience of heaven in me. Because we are heaven in me, there is no sin. When we are not experiencing heaven inside ourselves, we are just missing the mark. We're just off base. We've made a mistake or an error. But that doesn't mean that we are bad. It's just that there's an error in our thinking and we've gone the way of the ego. We are all special. We're all part of the all. So the ego, which split off from the divine mind, would like us to believe that, no, I'm special. And if you're with me, you're special. Until I say you're not, because special love turns into special hate. And that's a whole nother class. It's the body's eyes that see separation. So and I'm going to explain that in detail about the mechanism of how the body sees separation in a little bit. So we'll go into that. And to know oneness comes from a vision of our higher mind. So in order for us to authentically know we're one, we have to move out of the duality, really enter into a wholehearted state of love and consciousness, and then raise our frequency, our vibration, so that we can know the truth of who we are. And that comes from practice. That comes from joining with others who are able to sustain a Christ consciousness. And with those people, we're able to bring into this. So now going back to the course, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, Peter makes references to this love relationship that has often been misinterpreted, I believe. Peter says to Mary's sister, "We know that the Savior loved you more than the rest of the women." And then he goes on to say, in other parts in the Gospel of Thomas, we continue to learn that Peter really actually has a problem with Mary. And he says in the Gospel of Thomas, "Let Mary leave us, for women are not worthy of life." So when Jesus is meeting with the disciples, Jesus says to them, because they're all, especially Peter, is spearheading this revolt, that he's allowing Magdalene to be a part of the inner circle. And they're like, "Oh my God, how can this be? This is not right." And Jesus says to them, "I myself shall lead her in order to make her male, so that she too may become a living spirit resembling you males." I love that sentence. Resembling you males, like, okay, you need her to be a man. So in the Gospel of Thomas, he states about Mary Magdalene, it is her breath that, according to Jesus, makes her fully human. Because she breathes in the breath of God, and without the breath of God, there is no life. So for every woman who will make herself male will enter the kingdom of heaven. So, okay, gals, if you want to know how to make yourself male, that's an interesting idea. So this is the painting of Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel, and here's God who is within. It's interesting because you've got this divine mind. Here's the stem of the spinal cord. Here's the case of the brain. And no one talks about who this is, but this is Sophia, the wisdom of God, the feminine, and she's holding up God the Father. And this is part of what the divine mind is. There is the feminine face of God and the masculine face of God, all as a part of one. And this, of course, is Adam. So notice it says, "For every woman who will make herself male." How in the world do we make ourselves male? So first we take a deep breath in, where we breathe the breath of life. This is the Shakti Shiva. This is the integrated whole being. When we stop identifying with the illusion that I'm male and you're female, or I'm female and you're male, we become what they call an anthropos, fully integrated, whole, and complete being. And the anthropos being is not all fragmented. It's divinely conscious of our wholeness. So you recognize your masculine aspects, your feminine aspects, and you've fully integrated yourself into your divine being. So it's kind of like an acorn seed. The acorn plant from the acorn seed does not become a different kind of plant, a palm tree or something. it becomes an acorn tree, because in the seed contains everything that the plant is. So even though it's in its form of potential and doesn't look anything like the tree, it's still, so that is our divine nature. We are implanted with the seeds. We are this anthropos, both already and not yet. So we're growing into our ability to become whole. And Jesus, speaking in the Course in Miracles, says, as you remember the teachings of the apostles that I told them myself, that there was much that they would understand later. They were not wholly ready to follow me at this time. So, unfortunately, they were not awake enough. And Peter says to Mary, tell us whatever you remember of any words he told you, which we have not yet heard. And Mary says to them, I will speak to you of that which has not been given to you to hear. I had a vision. I had a vision of the teacher. And I said to him, Lord, I see you now in this vision. And he answered, you are blessed, for the sight of me does not disturb you. There, where is the nous, the divine mind, lies the treasure. So the nous, or the divine mind, is the treasure. And then I said to him, Lord, when someone meets you in a moment of vision, is it through the soul or through the spirit? And the Savior answered and said, he does not see through the soul nor through the spirit, but the nous, the mind, that is between the two, that is what sees the vision, and it is. So each enlightened partnership is fully human. Anthropos. We are this anthropos state, both already and not yet. Just as the acorn is both already and not yet. The oak tree is all its splendor, but it still contains all that the oak tree is. And this is what Leloup is suggesting, is that Anthropos speaks of an inner or essential man that Mary, it is said to feel this inner human in herself. And when she identifies this as her true self and she understands everything. So Mary's teaching is, as the teacher, was that she understood herself as a fully awake, fully human person, equal, the mirrored reflection, the Christ Sophia. So Leloup is the translator of the Coptic, Egyptian Coptic version of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene into French. And then it was translated from French into English by Joseph Rowe. And Joseph Rowe also translated the Gospel of Thomas. So the Gospel of Mary, it contains precious information about the first Christian communities. Their deliberations and conflicts give us a sad foretaste of the exclusion of the feminine. So this was not the original intent. The original intent, but unfortunately, as was shown in this Botticelli painting, you know, Magdalene was stripped of her royal robes, her royal status, diminished to the statue of a prostitute, and was closed out of the church. And it's so funny because I was looking for a place to do a celebration, and there's a Baptist church in Tiburon that is beautiful, and it's like right on the edge of where the moon rises. So this particular year was a full moon for the feast day of Mary Magdalene, and I knew they rented out the place, so I thought, I'll go talk to them, and maybe they'll rent it to us, and we can have this place where we'll be able to watch the moon rise and celebrate her. So what ended up happening was, when I was talking to the woman at the church. She says, "Oh no," she goes, "Oh yes, Jesus loved Mary," and she's like really like, "Oh my God." But no, 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 no. We cannot have Magdalene in the church. So I'm thinking to myself, I'm saying, now, let me get this straight. You believe that Jesus is going to come from the heavens. He's going to, with the rapture, and he's going to get all the saved people and return them to heaven. And so you're going to run up to Jesus and you're going to say, "Oh my God, you are going to be so happy. I kept Mary Magdalene out of the church." And this is going to be okay with him? I don't think so. So this is an example of what Jesus is talking about in A Course in Miracles, of how they missed the point. They continued to paint her, and sculptures present her as very wretched, so that there would be kind of like this, this is not somebody we should emulate, when the truth is that she was extraordinary, as we will come to learn. The other thing that was really interesting was one day I was sitting in meditation, and I always ask, what would you have me know? What would you have me do in my meditation? And I heard this voice that said, Google Magdalene underwater. And so it turns out that the divine feminine, of course, never made it over with the Mayflower. And as you remember, there was the favorite tale of Hans Christian Andersen. And so the divine feminine really got shipwrecked coming to America. So when I heard this image about Magdalene underwater, I was like, oh, wow, I wonder what Magdalene underwater is going to be all about. And of course, when I Googled it, what came up was the story of the Little Mermaid. So this story begins with Ariel defying her father, who is, basically he is the Michelangelo's patriarchal father, the white-bearded, and same thing, and he is forbidding her from finding the treasure. So you remember the line was, "There, where is the nous, the divine mind, lies the treasure," in the Gospel of Mary. So the divine feminine is blocked from knowing the truth about herself. She must only give allegiance to the divine masculine, and she must not know the truth about herself. So here's the Michelangelo's God, and here's the Little Mermaid God, same white-bearded father. So when I Googled the Magdalene underwater, what came up is the George Latour painting. So I was thinking, wow, why is this painting of Mary Magdalene in the, coming up with how did this happen? George Latour's painting is this called The Smoking Flame. And so, of course, the story is that, and I had seen The Little Mermaid, and I don't remember seeing this painting. It was really kind of interesting. And I went and got the film again. Well, it's in the cave, and it's there for just a second. And so what happens is her father discovers that she's been keeping these treasures in, and she is denied knowledge of the treasures of what she has found. Everything is destroyed, and so suddenly he becomes this raging, abusive father, which many of us have dealt with, we also have been stripped of the divine feminine, the beautiful imagery. And you'll see, this is probably the only church in America that, actually Grace Cathedral now has a painting of Mary Magdalene in the church, but this one's in Utah. And this is Magdalene with her red long hair, because that was a symbol of the Magdalene too, was the red hair. And so Ariel, the Christian church, promoted the ideas that mermaids were dangerous temptresses, the sexuality. So mermaids became a victim of the repressive sexual attitudes of the Christian church. So mermaid carvings are prominent in church decorations in the Middle Ages, warning people. So here's a mermaid who is finding the image. And so there it is, Magdalene as the Anthropos, whole and complete. So A Course in Miracles goes on to say that although they are no longer visible, the image can yet be called upon. So she is calling upon the image of Mary Magdalene. And this longing to be fully human because of the suppression. So she's a half human, and we're often told that we are half human. So she cannot be lost to us, because in A Course in Miracles, the Manual for Teachers, it says there are those who have reached God directly, retaining no trace of worldly limits and remembering their own identity perfectly. These might be called teachers of teachers, because although they are no longer visible, they can yet be called upon. And they will appear when and where it is helpful for them to do so. So this is, so when I found this book that was written by Claire and Margaret on the secrets of Magdalene, in the summer of 2004, Mary Magdalene herself made herself known to Margaret Bailey through means of spiritual communication, and Margaret entered the silence, so beloved and revered by Mary, as her gospel reveals. This silence takes the form of a ring of inconceivable, beautiful light through which Margaret passes in order to commune with Mary, to receive her teachings for today. So it's important to remember, I'm going to bring it up later, because the Course in Miracles explains what this silence that takes the form of a ring of inconceivably beautiful light, what this is all about. So the ring, this world of light, this circle of brightness, is the real world, where guilt meets with forgiveness. Here is the source of light, nothing perceived, forgiven, nor transmitted, merely known. So it's kind of like it's revealed to us as we are in the question and we're opening to have eyes to see and ears to hear. Things become known to us. They're already there. They're already inside us. And so she is often painted with a skull representing her knowing. And the silence is the way in. So the body and the mind are quieted and calmed by the gentle, focused breathing. The mind descends softly into the heart and waits in stillness, ready to serve. Wouldn't that be great if that's what we did? We descended softly into the heart and we wait for stillness, ready to serve. It has to remain humble, or the ego will assert itself. So with our humbleness and our connection to the divine self, waiting for instructions, for guidance from God is what is going to help us. The heart consciousness, which is different from the intellect, throws out the radiance, which is its essence, and begins to ascend to the highest sphere of which it can conceive. So let's just take a breath for a second and just let that sink in for a minute. Just sitting in the silence. So when we go back to the Smoking Flame painting from George Latour, I asked the question, why this painting? Why would Disney pick this painting as the painting to be the one? Of course, this is all just like things were revealed to me that I had no prior knowledge, but now they start to make sense. They start to hook up. I think this is true because there are hundreds of Renaissance paintings of Mary Magdalene. And why this particular painting? Well, this painting is a series of 3 paintings. And the first painting refers to the deepest inner flame. So George Latour is painting Mary Magdalene with her hand on the skull of Christ. And as he's painting her hand on the skull of Christ, he is reflecting that she is connected to the divine mind. She's also looking very deeply at the flame. So she's trying to actually go into a meditation. And you see how her legs, one is dark and one is light, and her skirt is hiked up and her blouse is off her shoulders. It's a very sensual way of being. So she's feeling her way. This is a very strong feeling. So it was recognized that this is what Claire and Margaret are talking about in their book. It recognized the sphere becomes the quality of consciousness. It touches and resonates with the deepest inner flame. The interior recognition is monitored throughout the span through which communion with the consciousness of the highest spheres takes place. Therefore, control and responsibility are not surrendered. The conscious self, receptive and silent, obedient to the light, makes of itself a vessel. Thereby, self-conscious, the thrust of the lower self, which is based in ego, is kept firmly in abeyance. So she's actually able to, being obedient to the light, making herself a vessel, she enters into a state of consciousness that allows her to have this greater experience that is free of the ego. So you just take a minute to breathe that in. Being free of the ego. Just being in love. In the silence. So what we discover is that this painting is telling the story of the missing pages. It is as if George Latour had the missing pages, where it speaks about the light and the love and how she connected to the light within. So of course it would be ripped out. For they're providing you with the information. You see how the books of knowledge are on the table. There's a cross on the table. There's various other items. This crossing of her leg with a dark leg and a light leg is the duality of dark and light, but it's also forms an X, which was a way that artisans could communicate to the general public that this painting was painted by a heretic who is preserving the truth of the knowledge of Mary Magdalene's teachings. So she is very deeply, very vigilantly, obediently studying, looking into the light. So this is representing her inner journey of she wants to find the light within. She's not reading the books. They're on the table. She's not whipping herself, which was the practice of the day, that you were a sinner and so therefore you had to whip yourself as a punishment. Because in Jesus' teaching, there is no sin. And we are not deserving punishment. We are making mistakes because we're missing the mark about the really understanding our true nature. And so you see her hand is connected to the Christ consciousness. So she is focused on feeling her way into the Christ consciousness. And she is doing it with such intent and vigor of her steps. So he's actually showing us how she's learning how to discover this light within. So there's steps here that are being outlined. First, it is to contemplate the light. The awareness in silence so that you can be open to the guidance and the direction. The being open-minded to receive knowledge. And then a feeling into and cultivating the sensuality that you are connected to the beloved. So the love of God is what you are. You are the love of God. And because you are the love of God, you are connected in the deepest way. So this is the painting number 2 that he made of the smoking gun painting. This, you see, has a shift. The Christ skull is up on the book. So the Christ skull is the mind that knows the all, right? So the skull now represents her knowledge. And the deepest inner flame is actually showing like it is actually within the Christ consciousness. And her hand is still touching and connecting. And she's still very much feeling it because one shoulder is exposed, even though the other shoulder. So there's a transition that's being made here. So she was feeling her way into the beloved. She was trying to learn about the light within herself. She was trying to connect this longing, this deep longing, the mermaid longing, the finding the beloved within yourself. How do you find the beloved within yourself? So now she's beginning to understand as she meditates in the silence. She begins to make a connection to the truth of who she is, because it's an inner journey. You know, they say the word guru is G-U-R-U. So what I did was I blew up the painting so I could look at it closer, because there are some interesting things that were happening. There was now only one book. Before there was a couple of books. So there was like knowledge was outside yourself and you had to go read and study. Now there's one book that contains the all. It's part of the Christ mind. So one of her shoulders is still exposed. So she's still in the process, but she's making the journey. She's transitioning into deeper and deeper awareness of who and what she is. But now she's not looking at the flame. She's looking at the mirror. And a curious thing happens when we blow up this painting, because we notice that the mirror should be reflecting her face. But the mirror is obviously reflecting two things. It's reflecting the inner light, which is kind of located in the third eye. The mirror is also reflecting the skull. And if you see, the skull is actually on the skull is facing her. So she has her fingers on the skull, the eyes of the skull. That's where her hand is. The mirror, if anything, should be reflecting the back of the skull, but it's not reflecting the back of the skull. It is reflecting the front of the skull. And so with the light in the third eye, which is, they often talk about the third eye as being the ability to see, the visionary function of the third eye. So it's showing us that she is now looking at the mirror, and what she sees is she sees the Christ mind being reflected back to her, because she is moving or transitioning herself into a place of knowing that she is the Christ, that she is one with God. She has allowed herself to open up, and by her passion, her deep longing, her devotion, her feeling to want to know the truth about who she is, and the teachings, she is able to enter the mind of Christ consciousness and understand that that is her mind, that she is the Christ Sophia. So she becomes fully awakened. She now is face to face with the Christ as her self, which is what we all are. We are all going to be learning that. So we look at the next painting, the third painting in the series. Is a series of 3, right? The third painting. Now she's sitting up. She is taking notice of the painting. It's kind of off to the side, and you'll see that there are 2 lights being reflected. So the inner and the outer. She has made herself a vessel of light, and so she is now whole and complete. There is a gold frame around the mirror, and there is the inner flame solid. Remember, because the flame in the beginning in the first painting was actually an oil light, oil candle, and now the flame is solid. So the fluidity of coming into knowing, and then you come into a place where you are finally at that place of solid knowing that you are one with God. So you see the pearls that are strewn on the thing, and there's an expression in the Bible: we do not throw pearls before swine, because she is not swine. She is an enlightened, awakened being now. And you see how her hand is on top of the thing. She's kind of like kicked back, like, I got this one. I understand now. I accept myself as being one with God. And if you notice, she is pregnant, very obviously pregnant now. Her skirt has now dropped below her knees, and the full skirt. She is complete in her experience of wholeness, because the purity and of her, she just, instead of having this sexual longing and whatnot, because she's seeking and knowing and trying to understand, she has now come into full recognition of the truth of who she is. So her wholeness is complete. And as her wholeness is complete, you can see that her hands are resting on the skull, and that she knows the oneness of the inner and the outer. And this painting has the fleur-de-lis of royalty, for this is the true experience of the enlightened one. The light within, the light without, the hands folded, and being fully pregnant with the spirit, the vessel. She is, the conception has taken place. She has conceived. So it is with the vision of the nous, the divine mind, that's what nous means, that we overcome the without within. This is from the comparison between the 2 pages where they understand. So this oil candle, the fluid state, as when we are going into trying to find our way in by doing the inner work of going within, has now become solid. And she knows who she is. She sees the truth of her oneness. See, and we have been told we have been distracted, that the beloved is external, that you are half until you're whole when you find your beloved. So people are racing to find their man, their prince, based on a lie, because the only place that you find true love is within yourself. And that can awaken us when we can do it. And that's why their relationship was so powerful, because she found the truth of the love within herself, and he knew the truth about the love within himself. And then they extended and shared it. So they joined together, and in their joining, they became the living demonstration of the male and the female wholeness, completeness, anthropos, human being. And this is the story that is told in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. So she is a powerful demonstration on how to awaken. She was able to resurrect herself. So was Mother Mary. And they, anyway. So now let's take a moment and take a look at what the Course in Miracles says about this visioning process that allowed her to know that she's one. The Course brings forth two ideas. One is that the body's eye sees separation and only the past. To know oneness comes from a vision of our divine mind. So we have to know it. It's a gnosis, it's a knowing that comes when we are connected to our divine mind. So when you see with the body's eyes, what's happening is light is coming in. Everything that you see before you is light. Various forms, shades, differentiations, things that you can discern, different distances, and all that light goes in and hits the back of the brain. Back of the eyeball. And so as it hits the back of the eyeball, you will see that it's going to be picked up by electrical impulses, and it goes up into the brain, and it sorts through and creates an image for us that we then can decipher through what our brain says. So the Course in Miracles says the opposite of seeing through the body's eyes is the vision of Christ, which reflects strength rather than weakness, unity rather than separation, and love rather than fear. The opposite of hearing through the body's ears is communication through the voice of God, the Holy Spirit, which abides in each of us. So it's a different way of hearing, a different way of seeing. The new story of these two texts, the Gospel of Mary and the Gospel of Quick, point to this sacred union is within us. And that is our work to do, to find this hymn, heaven in me. The heaven that's inside of you, this love that's inside of you. The feminine face of God joins in oneness with the masculine. So if you are outwardly feminine, you would then find and integrate yourself with your inwardly masculine part, and you become into a more aligned, the Shakti Shiva in you has to become integrated. You have to accept your femininity and you have to accept your masculinity. Both are equal attributes. The ability to vision and become conscious, to have the eyes to see and the ears to hear. And this is why, even though you might say this secret teachings of Magdalene in the first 6 pages is, who knows if it's 100% accurate, if it's the real misinformation on the missing pages. I'm going to explore that in more detail with you coming up. But when we have the ability to vision, when we can cross the veil and we can go into a knowingness, a gnosis, the sacred information is all there. It's actually quite simple. It's really the connection to the truth of who we are. the love that we are. And that's the most important thing. And the ego will have none of it. None of this holiness stuff, none of this joy and peace. Now, this is a page out of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, page 123. And Lulup was trying to help us to understand the process of how this relationship is, this oneness is. So you see the circle of oneness, and at the top is God is, because there is nothing, as soon as you try to identify that God is this or God is that, you're bringing it into another realm. The love that God is just love. There is no definition. There is no opposite. It just is. But this is a creative being that extends itself in love. So we feel love. We know what love is. Everybody's had an experience of love. Maybe their experience was an experience that came out of contrast because they had a lack of love. But there's somehow, in some way, there has always been some, even however tiny, kernel of kindness or compassion that every human being, and then we make a choice. Are we going to become this loving being? Are we going to be created in this image and likeness of God? Are we going to become this being of love? So that has been our journey, to really look at and see, are we going to know ourselves as love? It is not that easy, because there's constantly things that, and of course, this is why Mary Magdalene was the alchemist. She was able to sort of mix it all up, and she was able to integrate and take the teachings in a way. And the Renaissance painters were trying to preserve the integrity of her work. So here we are, an hour or so into this webinar, and we haven't even talked about the missing pages, but we have, because what I feel was that both the Little Mermaid movie and the George Latour paintings were describing and showing some of the teachings that were so-called lost to us, but somehow through the divine mind of the creators of these of this artwork and this film, they were able to, maybe not consciously even, know. I mean, why they picked George Latour's painting was very curious to me, because they could have picked hundreds of Magdalene paintings, and there's certainly Magdalene paintings that show her as the penitent, remorseful prostitute. But they didn't. They picked the painting that's connected to the story of her awakening. And of course, that's what the Little Mermaid is doing. She's going down into the depths of the sunken ship that has been lost to us. And she's raising up and bringing up the awareness of the divine feminine, the smoking flame, the awareness of the woman who is fully enlightened, fully awakened, fully in her living demonstration example. So let's take a look at what the missing pages that come out of, they're in chapter 29 of the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, and the secret teachings of Mary Magdalene in this book. So I'm just going to read this and just take it in for a second, and we'll just take it for a grain of salt. It's true or not true, but we could, as the Course of Love says, sometimes in the myth there is more truth than in the reality. So we'll see. And the Lord said, "The eyes of the vision is within the soul. Let those who have the vision see. Those that would listen, let them hear. For those that listen will hear the breath of silence. And then the Lord said, let us return to our true nature. So right there, just on the very first page, there are so many references that we've already spoken about that exist in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, where they're explaining to you the difference between seeing with the ability to vision versus just seeing with the regular body size, and why those who have the vision see. There's a different kind of seeing. It's seeing the truth. And then those who listen, they're listening for what the Spirit is saying, and they're getting that guidance. And they do that through listening and entering into the silence. So it's with their breath, their living breath. They are life itself, living and breathing, and through the silence. And then they go, as the Lord says, into our true nature. So this is really critical, because this is one of the teachings in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene that I love the most. And it's on, anyway, what it says is, we take inspiration from manifestations. So here is an extraordinarily beautiful manifestation. So this painting, photograph shows of your true nature. So when we look out at the beauty of nature, and we see a beauty in the twinkle of an eye, the beauty in a beautiful flower, it helps us to remember. And this is from page 8 in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. So let's just take that in for a minute. So those who have ears, let them hear to the journey of love within. I had a vision of the teacher. I said to him, Lord, I see you now in this vision. Mary is telling Peter this. Lord, I see you now in this vision. And he answered, you are blessed, for the sight of me does not disturb you. Where there is the nose lies the treasure. The nose being the divine mind. So now we go to page 2. And I say unto you, you can open your heart to love. Love has no bounds. Love must be unfettered on all levels. Love does not cry, murder, as this darkness darkens our very soul. How can we kill that which we love? Love does not cry, hate, for how can we hate when to do so would hate ourselves in the same process? Love does not cry greed. How can we take more than that which is the measure of our capacity? Is that not true? Love does not fear. How can we fear? For we know what we fear is not real. The word fear is false evidence appearing real. Love does not lust. How can we grasp after what we have already? So here in these 2 pages, you see lots of very powerful understandings about what love is and the unconditional nature of love, the heartfelt nature of. Here's page 4. Love does not envy. Love knows we have all. Love does not steal, as this would take away the very heart of our giving, which is love. Love does not cry judgment. Love is not bound to scales of more or less. It is self-sustaining of its own balance. How can we judge, lest we be judged? It's the all. See, there is the male and the female in harmony, all chakras open. We talked about in the first webinar, the chakras, and that's what they were able to do for each other. They were the living embodied demonstration of the fully anthropos person, open to free expression, open-hearted, wholehearted sense of empowered essence of greater truth, agape love, grounded, connected in the highest vibration, connected to all, living truth. So, page 5, love does not blame. To be blameless is the true gift. And we've seen Jesus demonstrates that where he is defenseless. There's nothing to defend. Is this love does not discriminate, as discrimination is not the truth. There is no discrimination because we're all one. Love does not lie, thus this is just fear to hide behind. Love transcends the all. The breath of life is love. Let me say that again. The breath of life is love. For it is in the breath that we have life. And this is the last of the missing pages. All that is composed is of the elements, and it is your attachment to this structure that has no permanence. Attachment to your corrupt nature is that which binds you to matter, to illusion and suffering. Attachment to matter is a force to be reckoned with. Those who have ears, let them hear. So now we begin with where the Gospel of Mary Magdalene starts. And we have this actual fragment. And the fragment says, but what is this matter? Will it last forever? And the teacher answered, all that is born, all that is created, all the elements of nature are interwoven and united with each other. All that is composed shall be decomposed. Everything returns to its root. Matter returns to the origins of matter, and those who have ears, let them hear. So we will go into, in the third webinar series, we'll go into the whole idea of matter. And it's really fascinating because as you take the time to stop and really think about and reflect on this whole acknowledgement of matter, you'll see that you get led right into the whole quantum physics and the understanding that matter is simply the vibration and that we are creating and forming matter in our world to create our world. And anyway, that will be where we will explore next time. Just take a moment too to kind of explain the difference between the Gospel of Mary and the Bible. So Marian is considered an anthropos, a whole human being, where in the Bible and the teachings that have come out of the Bible, she is being portrayed as a whore. There's one sentence in Luke chapter 8 that demonizes and minimizes the importance of her role, even though she played a major part in financing Jesus' ministry. With him were the 12, and certain women who have been healed of evil spirits and infirmities, Mary, who was called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had gone out. Well, In the original Greek translation, as we covered in the first webinar, we know that the word was actually diamon, and it meant a person who was transforming or moving into a more divine nature, a more divine state, not Halloween demon, which was just what we're led to believe today. So in A Course in Miracles, it begins to talk about it is wholly an illusion. It gives way softly to mountaintops that rise above it and has no power at all to hold back anyone willing to climb above it to see the sun. If you see a dark cloud, it can appear like it's dangerous and foreboding, but if you actually put your hand to the cloud, you'll find that your hand goes right through. There's actually really nothing there. So it's a great metaphor to understanding this circle of light or this ring of fear. So, we have been clouded over, given wrong information, misinterpretations, and now what's rising forward, because it cannot do anything other than rise forth. The truth has to come out. The truth has to be known because it is in us. And at some level, there are those of us who hear and who see and who have come to know, in the true sense of knowing, that there is something more. And so we honor the risen, enlightened being, the fully and whole and complete anthropos integrated self of the Magdalene. Thank you for joining me in this webinar. Thank you for spending this time with me. Blessed be. See you next time. Hopefully you'll come to our Easter celebration, and we will see you very shortly. That is April 1st at Unity, and you can go to my website, the Gospel of Mary Magdalene.info, to get more information, or you can email me at magdalenegospel@gmail.com. Thank you so much.